Oh my gosh, you're here, Alex.
What's up?
You've saved everyone from my vague
No, I'm
ramblings.
sorry. I didn't realize it was like a custom link. So
No, I should have given you the heads up that we changed our entire format a little bit. Also, excuse my sitting for today. Alex, how are you? Welcome back to America. I know you've been back now for some time. We've wanted to get a chance to sit with you and talk to you about Oslo. I know when we talked before you went over, you were really emphasizing that this is not just a Bitcoin conference, but it's a freedom conference.
yeah,
And there are going to be a lot of people who are not even necessarily Bitcoiners, but not even believers in Bitcoin. And I'm just curious, just to kick it off, how how was some of the reception from the non-Bitcoiners learning and understanding how Bitcoin can help them, and then also on the other side, how was the experience seeing Bitcoiners trying to help the people who need it most really understand this technology?
yeah. It was very profound. And thanks both of you for having me here. This is just a YouTube thing, right?
We're streaming to YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, LinkedIn, and
Okay, but I don't
that's
need
it.
to do anything on Twitter, right? I can just interface with this.
Absolutely.
Okay. No, it was very profound. I mean, look, it's been 14. It was the 14th annual event, and we've been building this movement of badass freedom fighters from around the world for a long time. And again, over the last 5 years, we've been adding a little bit of Bitcoin content. This was definitely kind of the peak of that. Um, and I think the idea is that overwhelmingly, it is clear that activists operating under authoritarian regimes need an alternative monetary system. They cannot use the legacy system. I mean, it's quite clear. Legacy money is political, okay? And that might work if you live in a democracy and the party that you like is in power. That means that political money might be okay for you. Um, Now, that's even dismissing, concerns over debasement and inflation and things like that. That's just like you're probably okay. Like if the ruling party is in power and it's a relative democracy and you like them, your bank account's probably not going to get frozen, right? And then if you're in a robust democracy, even if you're in the opposing camp, your bank account's still not going to get frozen. So that's kind of that robust democracy reality where like political money doesn't really matter or you don't really understand that money's political is kind of the thing for like about a billion people. For a little over a billion people, they live in a pretty strong financial system with a robust democracy where even if they like belong to an opposition party that's critical of the current government, they're not going to get their stuff stolen or confiscated, most likely. But that's just like a very small percentage of the world population, right? So the people that we focus on at the Oslo Freedom Forum are coming from like North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Yemen, Ukraine. I mean, you name it. And they have massive problems with money being political. Um, they have issues of transmission, of just simply sending and receiving. They have issues with savings. They have issues with fundraising. They have issues with accessing good fiat money, uh, because for most people in the world, their fiat money is terrible. It's not only like a sieve and loses value really quickly, but it also is hard to connect to other fiat money. Something that we don't appreciate maybe as much as we should as maybe dollar or euro users is that like if you use the colonial franc or the Venezuelan bolivar or the Nigerian naira or whatever, it's not just that the currency sucks. It also is hard to like exchange and to use dollar dominated financial technology like PayPal. It's more expensive for you to use these things. It's more costly. There's often errors. And sometimes it just is not even an option. Like if you live in Palestine, it's like, I mean, it's not like you can use Amazon or PayPal or whatever, you know, either at all or remotely with the same privileges we can. So, I think that what's interesting is that at the conference we were there for, I was essentially there for a week, and I mean, I didn't even look at the price the whole time. The interesting part is that for like a lot of the human rights practicalities and applications of why are people using Bitcoin, it could be $100 or $1 million. It doesn't matter. Like it does the same thing. That's not nice. So I mean, it's like kind of incredible that the technology is so price agnostic in terms of its utility. Now, of course, its kind of longer term utility, which might be existentially most important, is its ability to fight debasement and inflation. But that's only possible to see on a longer time frame. I mean, it's undeniable. You throw up a 5 year of any fiat currency versus Bitcoin. I mean, it's not, the fiats aren't going to make a comeback. Let's put it that way. But that's tough to see on a 1 year or a 1 month or a 1 week time frame, right? And in many cases, obviously, as of right now, like people are so in the moment that they can only see the last 6 months and they can only see, oh my God, Bitcoin's crashing. So it's much harder to make the case for Bitcoin's digital gold proposition simply because it requires a longer time frame. But it's very easy to make the case for the human rights proposition, and it's undeniable.
Yeah, I think it's just such an important point that you just made, which is that, for those of us that are in somewhere like the United States or, Europe or many other countries, we just have a completely different understanding of what Bitcoin is and why it's important. And getting exposure to these use cases for Bitcoin from people who are interested in it for just completely different reasons than, number go up. It's a really, really powerful experience.
Well, but I mean, even for people people who I'm just going to make a blanket assumption and put all of us in the same bucket. People like us likely earn a fiat income, or mostly a fiat income. And then we save into Bitcoin, maybe, let's say. I assume a lot of the listeners are falling into that category. They're in America or Canada or Europe or something, and they love Bitcoin. If they're listening to this, they probably don't just love it for number go up, because the number hasn't been going up in the last 8 months. They obviously have a deeper appreciation for it, which is fine. But the primary motivation of what they're doing mechanically with Bitcoin is still number go up. Like, it's still this realization that, hey, in 10 years, Bitcoin's going to be a lot more valuable than it is now. So let's try to exchange this like rapidly depreciating fiat currency, which is going to go to zero, for Bitcoin. Like, this is still the smart trade, and it's still what a lot of people are doing. But that's just a very different dynamic and a very different framework from the way that a lot of other people interface with Bitcoin and use it. You're talking about somebody who, when some other dictator invaded her country, and the banking system froze, they needed to get money in to a territory that she was operating in to buy like bulletproof vests and night vision goggles and stuff. And the banking system just didn't work. Like it was literally impossible to move value into that place. But Bitcoin allowed her to move the value there and actually save lives. Or, maybe you do the case of Cuba, where you've got people who are completely cut off from their families in the United States, and who are suffering both from a military dictatorship in Cuba that's ravaging the peso, where people have seen their purchasing power decrease by 90% in the last 2 years. And they also can't access their family because the Trump administration closed down 400 Western unions in Cuba. So they're totally cut off, and you got to use these like absurd kind of like mule systems to get money in, which require a ridiculous amount of trust and are very expensive. And it's no surprise that people have started to adopt Bitcoin in very large numbers in Cuba, percentage-wise. I mean, you've got people who are accomplishing two things. I mean, even with the crash, I mean, a lot of these folks who got into Cuba in the last couple of years were entering at a price point of $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. So, I mean, they're in the black, and all the peso users are way in the red. So that's been big for them. And then, of course, just the ability to like seamlessly, instantly connect financially with their family in America, regardless of what either government wants, is kind of amazing. And then there's the case of people who have to deal with like Hawala systems. Like there was this one activist who I look forward to doing more with in the future. Her name is Meron. She's from Eritrea in the Horn of Africa, and she's an incredible woman. She's saved more than 10,000 people by herself who have escaped from Eritrea from death. Basically, she's an incredible heroic figure. And a lot of these people resettle in East Africa. Not all of them make it to Europe or Israel. You know, as they escape Eritrea, they either go north and try to get to Europe or Israel, or they go towards Kenya. A lot of them end up in the Horn of Africa. They don't really speak local language. They don't have a bank account. So she uses the Hawala system traditionally to get money to them. And it's like she's based in Sweden. So she like goes to some guy in some neighborhood of Stockholm and gives him a bunch of cash and like fingers crossed, hopefully it makes it. And you're just waiting and you're calling and did you get it? Like there's tension all the time. I mean, psychologically, that's not a lot of fun. And oftentimes like payment just super delayed or doesn't make it or whatever. So the upgrade to Bitcoin for her has been absolutely transformative. And she has now educated all of these people and they each educate more people. And it's like this movement that she's created of people who pay and interact with each other using Bitcoin instead of Hawala. And in some ways, Bitcoin is just an upgraded Hawala system. Like it's just automating the trust element and the transaction speed. You know, you're still not using banks. Like Hawala is cool because you don't use banks, but Hawala is not cool because some dude could just. I mean, I understand there's all this reputation built in, and it's thousands of years old of a technology, and Hawala is to be respected for sure. But it just strikes me that clearly we have an upgrade here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know much about the Hawala system, but I think it's a really, really fascinating. What I have heard is super fascinating. Can you define what it is and why it is interesting and how it intersects with Bitcoin?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very popular way to move money in the Muslim world, in and out of the Muslim world. It's centuries and centuries old. It's pretty simple. I mean, it just relies on a network of broker dealers, basically, like many other aspects of the financial system. But again, like you might sorry.
Everything all right?
Yeah, sorry. Am I back?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay, I'm good. Sorry, I got this weird error message that popped up. You might, let's say you're Iranian, and you live in Toronto, and you want to send money to your family in Iran. Currently, there's all kinds of restrictions making that impossible. Like even if your parents are sick or whatever. So you go down to a part of Toronto. I think it's like called Little Tehran or something. And there's all these people who are money changers, and you'll go and you'll give them a stack of Canadian dollars, let's say 500 Canadian dollars or something, and they interact with their colleague in Tehran. I mean, today now we have cell phones, so it's obviously Hawala is much more efficient than it used to be. But the idea is that even back then, pre-internet, there was an element of trust where like you might go to somebody pre-internet, pre-phone, and say, "Hey, I'm waiting for 500 reals or whatever," and they have to get that message somehow from their counterparty, right? So there was always some element of delay. Today, that delay has been compressed. But the point is, you go down to the market, you exchange the bills, and the person on the other side has Iranian rial, and they give the equivalent amount to your family member. And it's like, you know, it's just a system like this, but it relies on them. Obviously, these parties not screwing you, and your protection against that historically has been reputation. Like you're never like, okay, you're never going to use somebody again if they screw you over, right? So Hawala is a strong system in many ways, but like it is not consistent or reliable, and it's not particularly comfortable to go with a bunch of cash into a place like this and do this, especially as a woman, for example. This person I'm retelling the story from loosely is a woman who has done this many times. So in her case, this woman of Iranian descent, she's not a big Bitcoin fan. She doesn't necessarily love the ideology or any of that stuff that some of its proponents espouse. But guess what? She uses Bitcoin because it's the best way to do what she needs to do, which is move value from point A to point B. And I think that's what a lot of the critics miss, right?
Absolutely. So you and I met earlier this year, or I suppose last year, as I was planning out the programming for Bitcoin 2022. Well, I've been following you for many years now. I'm realizing Q actually had to hop off. He's suffering from a massive migraine. That's why he was on the floor for a second there.
Sorry
So
for him.
it'll just be you and I today. But we didn't give you the opportunity to sort of introduce yourself and talk about the amazing things that you're working on right now. Can you give us an introduction to who you are and what you're about?
Sure. So I actually just celebrated my 15th anniversary at the Human Rights Foundation yesterday. So ever since June 15, 2007, thank you. I've been working for a civil liberties group in New York City created by people who survived dictatorships. So the important thing about the Human Rights Foundation, and this has helped me so much with Bitcoin, is that it's just got a different perspective. It was founded by somebody from Venezuela. It's chaired by somebody from Russia. Our current president is from Lebanon. They don't come from New Jersey. They've seen how most of the world operates. 53% of the world's population lives under an authoritarian regime. And say what you want about America, and I've got a lot to say about America, but we have tens of thousands of nonprofits. I think more than 70,000 nonprofits that exist here to protect the rights of everybody from stamp collectors to journalists to comedians to artists to whatever. We sue the U.S. government. We leak stuff. And it's not without risk, of course, but generally speaking, we make fun of the government. I mean, people are very, very well paid to go on TV and make fun of the government in our country. People are very well paid to publish scathing exposés on government corruption in our country. Now, this leads to impeachments. You just have to look at Nixon. I mean, Nixon is one of the most powerful people in world history in terms of if you think about the way that he and his advisors removed the dollar from the gold standard. Like, we're talking about somebody who was very powerful. Well, guess what? Bob Woodward, wrote the history of this, but you look at the Watergate stuff. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. So journalism in our country, public journalism has unseated presidents, has caused literal revolutions. I mean, if you look at things like women's suffrage and stuff like that, or of course the struggle for equality for African Americans. So, I mean, activism and journalism are no joke in the United States. I mean, I think a lot of Bitcoiners like to downplay these things, but no, this is real stuff that has actually changed our country for the better, for sure. Now, it's not a cure-all, and it doesn't mean we get the change we want. But I mean, we're a very different country than we were 100 years ago. I don't think anyone who's trying to argue anything other than that is silly. And a lot of that's because of activism, advocacy, people like MLK, etc. I mean, this stuff works. I mean, it doesn't fix everything. It doesn't work all the time, but it absolutely works. So we have that history in our country that continues to happen. You can't do this stuff in dictatorships. I mean, you just can't. I mean, it just doesn't work the same way. You don't have the same accountability mechanisms. As flawed as voting is, it is useful to a very large extent. There is no voting for free and fair elections in these countries. There is no free media. There is no rotation of who's in power. And I think Bitcoiners should really grasp this concept that absolute power corrupts absolutely. It doesn't matter if there's some dude in power who you think's really cool or you like. If there's no checks on his power, he's gonna be corrupt and he's gonna do stuff you don't like eventually.
Absolutely.
And you're playing with fire if you disagree. I mean, we have thousands of years of history to prove you wrong, right? Like there's there's like one Marcus Aurelius ever, right? I mean, there's not like for every noble king, there's 1,000 terrible ones. So it's like this is something that we take for granted often, that our society has checks and balances. And especially in the United States, we have this wonderful state system where like the states can provide different kinds of freedoms and people can kind of shop around and stay in different states. I mean, that's pretty cool. Yeah. But for most people, I mean, they're trying to get out. I mean, a lot of people are trying to get out. Like What's interesting is if you look at refugees, 96% of refugees come from dictatorships because people don't want to live there. I mean, it's very
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
They want to live in democracies. Now, there's different reasons for that, but like generally speaking, these are better societies. So at HRF, we come from a background of people who grew up or lived under dictatorships or authoritarian regimes, and they wanted to create an organization that could focus on that because that mission is so important because more than half of humans live under these regimes, and there's a lot we can do to help. And we don't focus on democracies. And again, it doesn't mean we don't think what democracies are doing is all good or isn't terrible. And personally, I speak out a lot about what, for example, the United States is doing or has done. But we have this united mission, and it's very clarifying and helpful. And it is with this perspective that I really understood Bitcoin. Because again, it's tougher. It's tougher if you're just like in the American bubble. Like you can kind of get it eventually. But I mean, if you're from Zimbabwe or Iran or Sri Lanka or something, there's nothing. I mean, it's an immediate obvious. Yes, I definitely want to learn more about that.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's sort of similar to this idea of like any of these concepts about political freedom. They resonate much more so vividly with somebody who's under attack right now. Like your average Ukrainian is going to have much more strong feelings about human rights and civil liberties than your average person in Utah. It's just clear, right? There's just when you're under attack or your friends are getting tortured or whatever, it's a lot more gritty and real for you. So that's my background. I spent 10 years working with activists and literally sending stuff into North Korea and to Cuba, working with Russian opposition, working with Chinese activists, Tibetans, Uyghurs, all this stuff. And then I started to realize how important money was in the context of human rights, kind of what we've already covered. And I had a long history of observing Bitcoin. Like I met Julian Assange in 2010. He spoke at our conference. 6 months later, Satoshi posted their last ever public post saying that maybe WikiLeaks shouldn't use Bitcoin because we weren't ready yet. A few months later, Satoshi disappeared forever in private correspondence. And then in June 2011, WikiLeaks posted its fateful tweet with the Bitcoin address in it. And they ended up raising a lot of capital that way. So I was kind of looking at that. But of course, at the time, I mean, Bitcoin was so weird and it wasn't worth anything. It was just kind of like an eyebrow raise. Few years later, we ended up using it to support Ukrainians who were pushing back against their own corrupt regime in 2013. This was right before Maidan Square. And then we started accepting Bitcoin donations in 2014. So I kind of like was definitely watching it, but it didn't fully capture my intellectual interest until early 2017. I was finally sort of convinced, and for the last 5 years, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, now 22, I've really been just kind of thinking about it all the time. It's just, to me, it's such a fascinating topic. And I mean, really, we joke about Bitcoin fixes this, but it really like fixes a lot of things. So that's why I'm excited to devote my career to it and to its to the nexus of these two things.
As always, incredibly articulate. That's so interesting. What do you think are what are some of the most interesting stories that came out of the Oslo Freedom Forum and the work that you're doing right now? What are some of the ones that you kind of weren't expecting or that surprised you or caught your interest, above and beyond the art, everything else that was happening?
Well, I mean, to give the framework for the Freedom Forum, we had at the Oslo Freedom Forum, we have morning programming, which are stage talks from activists, followed by interactive programming in the afternoons, which are panels and different sessions. And then we have workshops on the final day. And we had about 24 morning sessions, keynote speeches or firesides, one of them related to Bitcoin out of the 24. This was Fode Diop and Jack Mahler's talking about freedom money, very kind of in a concise manner, which was really cool. I thought they did an awesome job with that. Fode just telling his personal story and trying to get people to like see what it is from his shoes, which I thought was great. And Jack explaining kind of in normie terms how the technology worked. I thought was cool. And then we had a bunch of interactive sessions. I led one of them. We had ones on is Bitcoin compatible with democracy? We had ones on the Lightning Network. We had ones on mining and proof of work and proof of stake. We had one on stablecoins. So it was a rich program there. And then we had this Bitcoin workshop at the end. And I mean, the thing that I just was, and a lot of Bitcoiners were like, wait a second, most of us are Bitcoiners in this room, which is true. The room was packed. There were like 60, 70 people in there. But guess what? Like 15 to 20 of them were activists, and they were from a variety of places. And anyone who was in that room can attest. I mean, people got up there and were like, hey, I'm from Cuba. I'm from Nicaragua. I'm from Russia. I'm from Libya. Like, I'm from Eritrea. Like, there were a lot of activists in there. And the whole point was that it was supposed to be at least like a one-on, like every activist would have at least one teacher. It ended up being like that every activist had like 2 or 3 teachers. So we could probably work on that in the future. But the point is they had a lot of help, and just the raw interest from people who are starting at zero, like literally zero, but they want to go from 0 to 1. Like, that personal curiosity that drives you to go from 0 to 1 is often, in my case, it took years and years and years. Like in other people's cases, there's a deep skepticism that prevents them from doing so, or something about Bitcoin they heard about that they don't like, or they don't want to participate. They think it's criminal money or hurting the environment, or maybe they're salty about it because they heard about it a long time ago and it wasn't worth anything. Maybe their friends don't like it. I mean, there's a million reasons why you wouldn't go from 0 to 1, but these people are like, they don't know, Bitcoin from BitTorrent. They don't know anything. And they're like, tell me more about money the government doesn't control. Like, basically. Yeah. And you know what? That'll be an interesting 0 to 1. I mean, they're going to want to learn everything about blockchain and NFTs and everything, because that's what they hear about all the time. And, hopefully by just giving them some Bitcoin education, we'll set them on the right course. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, look, if someone wants to send you some money for NFTs, like, great. But I want to show you the power of this thing and how you can integrate it into your nonprofit. Because I think it's going to be something that is very powerful for you, and you can use it for a long time.
Very cool.
So that was one thing. Yeah. The other thing I was going to mention is the opportunity to bring some of these Bitcoin users who use Bitcoin in adversarial scenarios to Parliament to talk to the Norwegian government. And this is an important country. It runs the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. It owns the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. Don't they own like 2% of all stocks? Yes. Yeah, they own, I think, which is interesting these days. But yeah, they basically own 2% of like all the top Fortune 500 companies or something like that. That
is incredible.
They were very shrewd in the way they managed this fund. I mean, it's almost like, in some ways, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is almost like what a Bitcoin standard country might look like in the future if it's well managed. Because like, you kind of, in a Bitcoin standard, you're going to have a Bitcoin position, much like you had a gold position in the gold standard, and that position is going to fluctuate according to your trade dynamics. And Norway was profoundly lucky. Although for many people, it's the Dutch disease. Like for most oil countries, they're horrible, corrupt dictatorships. Norway's
go into that.
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
Bit more. Yeah. I'd love to explore what you just said and why that is, and then why places like, where you get to the Oslo Freedom Forum are able to resist that.
Well, I mean, it's just a matter of fact that out of the top 15 oil exporting countries, almost all of them are dictatorships.
Absolutely.
Rentier states, but I mean, why is Norway different is a great question. There are many reasons for that. People have argued that social trust was very important. People have argued that the level of homogeneity in the society was important, that it wasn't a country post-World War II in conflict, that it had a very high percentage of women at high positions in the state. There's all kinds of reasons. I don't know the exact reason, and no one really does. But the point is that the Norwegians figured out a way to save their energy profits in a smart way, and this really started to manifest in the 1980s. And by the early 90s, when we had this banking crisis, that was really where Greenspan in America, he as head of the Fed, he implemented the legacy of monetary policy that we're now dealing with right now. At that time, the Norwegians actually had this savings account that they had been like topping up every year from their oil profits instead of spending lavishly
What a
or
novel concept.
siphoning off to personal bank accounts. They were saving it for the country's future. And in an era where, I mean, they got in there at the beginning of 40 years of like stock and bond bull market. So they were just like pouring into bonds and equities the whole time. And they did really well. And they were like, they had a banking crisis in the early 90s, and they were able to actually buy the banks off the private sector, recapitalize them for like nothing, by the way, and then sell them back at a profit. So they made money on the banking crisis.
Wow.
And then they didn't have a problem really in 2008, but in 2020, you might have seen stuff. They have an airline called Norwegian Air, went totally bankrupt. So they bought it for like nothing, and then they did sort of a similar thing. So I think this is interesting because it kind of gives you a sort of a vision of what a Bitcoin standard country might actually look like.
Yeah.
As far as the way it operates. But in any event, it's an important country. It has this fund. It's in NATO. Norwegian leads NATO actually right now. Jens Stoltenberg, it has a strong currency, obviously that's tied to oil, but I mean, it really punches above its weight for a country of 4 million people. In fact, I always thought this was interesting. I mean, Norway, I think 4 million people uses more energy than the bottom 40 poorest countries in the world combined, which have, of course, hundreds of millions of people. So it's a very, very advanced country, let's put it that way, with a very, very high press freedom, equality of life. I mean, people love living in. I mean, Norway's a wonderful place.
I feel like it's like Shangri-La. Like it's where I like.
It's Norwegians get. I mean, they have first world problems, right? There's this thing called janteloven. They don't like people being too successful. There's kind of this. There's still this mentality from before they got rich, of like being humble and like being farmers, and like they don't love to see like spectacular success. It's okay if it's in sports or in diplomacy, but not in like business. So a lot of like success, they don't have the whole Bill Gates, Warren Buffett thing. Yeah. Like Americans lionize Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. We love these people, generally speaking. And I'm talking about Bitcoiners, but like historically, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett or Elon, like are very popular because Americans see financial success generally as like a good thing.
Wait, but that sounds
not the case in Norway. Definitely not.
I mean, that sounds like a positive change, or are you saying that it's negative?
No, I think it's on the negative side because there are business people who've done
incredible things,
and they're demonized over there. So they all like basically.
Oh wow, it goes negative. Okay, got it.
No, it's like it's almost to the French in terms of like we're going after you. So the point is that it's an important country with like a very different culture, and we got the opportunity to talk to the government and the guy who just was Minister of Climate like 6 months ago. He was in the room. He's an MP. We had the heads of finance, energy, and business committees there. Norway has 7 parties, so we had participation from 4 of the 7 parties. So it was really, really positive, and we essentially got to go through firsthand personal stories of why was Bitcoin useful for you. So we had people in the room from Nigeria, Ukraine, Venezuela, Palestine, places like that. They were able to share their stories, which was exceedingly profound. And then also we had Jack Mallers and Lynn Alden and Nick Carter, for example, to deal with the questions about interoperability of fiat Bitcoin as well as the environment stuff. So it was super nice to be able to, when a bunch of policymakers are like, well, tell us more about like Bitcoin and energy, for me to just be able to like, oh, well, I have like Nick Carter and Lynn Alden here to like answer your questions. So it was totally awesome. We were in there for like 90 minutes, and I think it's a blueprint. I mean, I'd love to do something similar for any government, just because then they start asking questions like, well, tell us more. When your bank account was frozen, how exactly did Bitcoin help? Like it's quite clear they never had gone through this mechanism. They never really thought about the mechanics before.
Yeah.
And I think it leaves an impact. And, one of the big outcomes of the Freedom Forum and the Financial Freedom Track, which was sponsored by this awesome Norwegian company called CT, was was very much this letter that we wrote at financialinclusion.tech, which was kind of a response to this like letter by 25 technologists hating on cryptocurrency, and our response was like, listen, like,
Oh, I saw that. It was so
yeah,
good.
yeah, and it's just like, listen, this is 21 countries, and it's like, okay, like,
Why do you hate
personally,
freedom?
well, no, personally, we've seen how Bitcoin and to a different extent, stable coins have really empowered people in our countries. We don't have the dollar. We have collapsing economies. We have dictators. Like, these are very important tools for us, and we hope the U.S. Congress can keep this in mind as it makes policy. Like, if you want to be talking up yourselves as the leader of the free world, well, like, you got to be mindful that this technology is oftentimes the only lifeline out there for a lot of people. And then that it ends up doing way more for like individual rights in some countries than any government program could ever do. So hopefully that we get that across. And there's some other things that will come out as well out of the event. We've got an NGO guide we're creating by September. It should be out, like an open and free guide that will be like for nonprofits that are receiving grants, and also for foundations and governments that are giving grants. It'll be like a practical guide on how to incorporate Bitcoin, best practices based on field research.
Wow.
This is missing. This doesn't exist today, so that's going to be super helpful, because there's a lot of nonprofits that are just like, they want to onboard, and then they have very kind of simple like questions like,
Yeah.
well, what should we use? It's just like, okay, well, maybe BTC Pay, and then, okay, well, where do we go from there? Where do we have it point to? It's
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
like, okay, like, do you do a hot wallet? How much is safe on a hot wallet? Like,
We were just talking about
use
that
a cold wallet
before you came on.
And, for most of these organizations, like, a hot wallet's going to be perfectly fine. I mean, like, as long as they secure it correctly and they have the seed in the right place, like, I mean, it's going to be fine for like, daily flow of, occasional donations. For really large amounts of money, I mean, it might be a different story. But the fact is that, if you have a BTC Pay, it's going to be very, very difficult to track what's going on, especially if you handle things correctly on the back end. So and then, you can also, what's cool is you can pay out directly. You could pay out directly in Lightning to a mobile wallet from whatever wallet you're using, would be BTC Pay, and then pay from there to your contractors in different countries. And if you go from if you just have a very simple chain where it's like Breeze Wallet, Moon Wallet, or something, I mean, good luck tracing that. It's like a UTXO swap, because they use these like mobile Lightning wallets use submarine swaps. So it's like,
Yep.
It's very strong with privacy. So
Interesting.
pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, so it just depends on what they need, but we'll work with them to we'll try to provide as many resources as we can, and get that document done. So there's some good things coming out, great things coming out of the conference. There's a lot more I heard about today on a call that you'll see. Some very exciting stuff.
Give us a taste.
Yeah, no. Just I think that, like, so Obi Nwosu was there, obviously,
Yep,
at the conference, and Odell was joking that he made everybody a Finmint maximalist. So
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I think that there's some clarity around the idea that, like, okay, well, maybe not everybody in the world can own an UTXO. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I mean, it seems like there's debate around that. But guess what? Like, everybody could use a Finmint, and maybe everybody, maybe as many people as possible try to self custody, but maybe the majority of people don't want to in the end, or we don't make it easy enough for them. So what's better than them using Binance P2P, which is like what people use in emerging markets? To be totally frank with you, they use Binance P2P, and the reason why they use Tether on Tron is this: they just pick whatever the cheapest stablecoin is. Like, they don't do self custody. So if we don't want people using banks, which are essentially tools of the government, then Fedimints are potentially a really good middle ground solution, where you're removing the Bitcoin from control of the state and from banks. You're not giving people perfect self-custody, but you're giving people something that may give them a lot of utility while being a middle ground. And if we can onboard most of the world onto Fedimints plus self-custodial wallets, I would say that would be a huge win. So you're going to see a lot on the Fedimint space. moving forward. And just the organizers of the Africa Bitcoin Conference, which is taking place in Ghana in December, were all in Norway, and they attracted a lot of support for their upcoming conference there. So December 7 to 10, it's going to be going down in Accra, and I'm really thrilled to be there. It's going to be great.
I love it. I love it. So, shifting topics slightly, what's gotten you really excited lately in the Bitcoin space? Like, or what have you been spending a lot of time thinking about day to day? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the news right now. Obviously, Celsius collapsing, the everything going on with the price. What do you find yourself kind of coming back around to and engaging with?
Yeah, I mean, just first of all, education. I mean, onboarding more people is really what it's all about. Integrating nonprofits like activists. I mean, that's really what I'm spending a lot of my day doing every day. But I mean, at the end of the day, I've been captivated by this idea of upgrading the average Bitcoin wallet in the next 2-3 years. Like what's that going to look like? What's your average open source Bitcoin wallet going to look like in 2-3 years? Meaning, what functionality is it going to have? Because currently it's send and receive, and that's great. That changed the world. It's good enough, but we could do better, right? I mean, so I'm thinking about when you interview people, you get all of these other use cases that they want or that they express to you, which include buy dollars, earn yield, or, for example, get credit, or go into a more private scenario. So I think you could start seeing, whether it's with Finmint or with Lightning smart contracts, and we'll see. But I think you could start seeing scenarios where Bitcoin users can live in self-custody and have a certain amount of Bitcoin that's theirs 100%, be their own bank. But then they can choose to opt into or peg into different systems that have different levels of trade-offs that give them more things without having to KYC or do anything like that, just taking some risk, right? So I think that's obviously the idea of Finmint. I mean, the whole threat of Finmint is you could get rugged by your Finmint admins, but the hope is that you're making a Finmint with people that and aren't going to rug you, so that chance is very small. Everything is a trade-off, right? So I think this idea of whether it's with a Finmint or some sort of smart contract where you're on one side of a bet, you could get dollar exposure as a Bitcoin user, which is obviously massively helpful and will provide enormous utility for tens of millions of people. You could put your capital to work. You could get interest on it. And whether that's just by providing routing and Lightning or doing something else, I think that's going to be a feature in a wallet. I think getting anonymity in Bitcoin will be very useful. Again,
Alex,
yeah, go ahead.
Can you explain for the audience what a Finmint is in its simplest form?
Yeah, well, you should look at the Bitcoin conference from 2 months ago or whatever, talk by Obi, which is a great one. But I mean, he kind of breaks it down. But I think the dream of the Finmint is that it's almost kind of in a way, it's almost similar to the Bitcoin Beach wallet that some people have heard about, where you are. It's sort of it's just in a layman's terms way. It's kind of I think the end user vision is sort of like a custodial Lightning wallet, but it's not. But the Lightning is not controlled by and held by one party. It's actually a multi-sig arrangement with a bunch of trusted people. So, for example, in El Zonte, that would be people like Roman and Mike Peterson and people who are part of the community who are probably not going to go rug everybody, right? So OB has this vision for let's say a village in Nigeria where there'd be a bunch of trusted elders or whatever, or people that are community leaders. So maybe 10 of them would have keys or whatever. So there'd have to be some sort of consensus between them to move the funds out or to change the rules of the Finmint. But this allows anyone who wants to use that Finmint and to use value in that Finmint, or even to peg value into or withdraw value out of that Finmint under a certain set of rules. So again, instead of using Binance P2P as your Bitcoin account, if you didn't want to deal with self-custody, you could use Finmint, and it could be this village's Finmint, or this business association's Finmint, or this company's Finmint, or whatever. and it provides like maximally powerful flexibility as a Bitcoin user. You unlock a lot of features that are just simply not possible with on-chain self-custody Bitcoin. And you know, part of this whole thing is going to be education around risk. Like, we're going to want people to self-custody some percentage of their funds, but they're going to want to do stuff with some of their Bitcoin. Like, it's just not going to sit there for 10 years. I mean, that's I mean, that might be cool. That might be a luxury that some people have, or that might be something that some people choose to do. But people want to put their capital to work. People want to earn interest on it. People want to borrow against it. People want to use it privately, maybe. There's all kinds of reasons why you may want to like take some of the Bitcoin that you're saving and peg it into a system where you can get some more flexibility. And the whole point around Fedimints is you don't need to use any tokens or stable coins or any of that crap. You can just use Bitcoin and a custodial agreements with other parties. So I think it's extremely interesting as a concept, and I'm looking forward to seeing it being rolled out. We have a bounty for Strike and Ahrefs have a bounty for like the first wallet that executes the sort of, let's say, the Chaumian eCash version. Like basically in a Fedimint, you can have purely anonymous eCash.
Yeah, exactly.
So like you could peg into the Fedimint and with some amount of Bitcoin, and then from there, yeah. I mean, on a wallet, imagine that there would just be a button saying "Go private." How much do you want to put in? Half of my Bitcoin on this wallet. Great. Press a button, and now you have like literal eCash, and then you would then go spend that with whomever you want, and it's not traceable.
So
and then you could peg out of it later would be the idea.
So I would kind of think of it as Fedimint is, which stands for Federated Chaumian Mints, is a system that allows, as you said, sort of a group, a federation within a community, whether that's a physical one or distributed, to be able to kind of share custody of or of the Bitcoin that is put into it, or approve certain transactions. And then using blind signatures, you basically can do this anonymously within that federation. Is that fair?
That's one aspect of it, is you can do eCash, but you can do a lot of other things inside Fedimints, is the part I'm getting at. Like, it can be very flexible. Again, you could have credit systems in Fedimints. You could people can earn interest. People could have essentially stablecoin, quote unquote, functionality. And it's very simple because you're making a trade-off. You're no longer using self-custodied on-chain Bitcoin. You're using essentially, you kind of think about it like a custodial Lightning wallet in a way. I'm being very, very layman in terms of like what the average person might how they might interact with it. It's obviously more complicated than this. You should definitely look at Opie's videos and look at, I think there's a fedimint.org website. But the hope is that it gives Bitcoin users a lot more flexibility and allows us to onboard a lot more Bitcoin users. Again, like, to be realistic, like, are 7 billion people going to self-custody Bitcoin? I don't know. But the point of Fedimint is that 7 billion people could use Fedimints. Again, because it's like you're removing the responsibility and burden of self-custody, but still providing access to Bitcoin is the idea.
So you have these trusted members who then...
Right, without relying on corporations or governments. So it is some sort of negotiation between human reality and our utopian vision of what Bitcoin is. And it may be very successful this decade. So we'll see. But I mean, clearly, if we're choosing between Fedimints and Binance, like, give me Fedimints 100
Absolutely.
times out of 100. I mean, if we're choosing self-custodied on-chain Bitcoin versus Fedimints, it's not the same. I'll take one or the other. I envision in the future people will use both, and they'll hopefully self-custody as much as they can for however long they can. But people have needs and they have interests, and like, this is the reality. Like, they need a flexible, like, sort of other layer that they can do stuff with. That's not just like on-chain transactions. That the on-chain transactions are going to be maybe in the future very expensive. I mean, who knows? So maybe these end up being things that are rarer for individuals, and that individuals interact with Bitcoin either or even just Lightning itself might be something where it ends up running into issues in the future in terms of scaling, and we end up using stuff like Fedimints to onboard like hundreds of millions of people. But we'll see. I mean, I'm
I just
bullish
say,
on it now, but like look for Finmint news in the next few months, like which
yeah,
which was catalyzed by the Oslo Freedom Forum. So let's just put it that way.
I love it. Okay. Well, so one thing I'd say for the audience is we'll put it in the description as well, but you can see I think it's fediment.org, which you mentioned. Also, there is a keynote that Obinwasu, who we were just talking about, gave at Bitcoin 2022. I believe that is on the Bitcoin Magazine YouTube, which you can check out. And then there's also a Bitcoin Magazine article, which we'll put in the show notes as well. Alex, it's been great talking to you, man. I can pay you no higher compliment than I just
appreciate the chance getting to catch up, and I've just been very inspired by what I've seen, and I know it's weird because people are deflated because of the dollar value of Bitcoin, but I can assure you
one
that
Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin.
Well, it's not only that. It's just that. I mean, this isn't just people have been using this thing for a long time, and I got to do this event in Texas last weekend with.
Oh, shoot! I'm so sorry. We literally only have 2 minutes left. Can you just say?
No. I can just 30 seconds it. I was just going to conclude with something. I was just talking with Roya Mahbub, who's a entrepreneur who started to use Bitcoin almost 10 years ago, and she put all her business into Bitcoin when it went to $1,200, and then it went down to $200. So she kept going, like she doubled down, right? Because she saw the non-price value of this thing. So if anything, now is the time, these next few months, where we can actually educate ourselves about self-custody and the kind of political revolution that is Bitcoin. So in any event, I really appreciate you having me, and looking forward to the next one.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much. Follow Alex on Twitter, and we'll talk to you soon. We'll be back. We're just going to jump to a quick commercial, and then we'll be back with Jimmy Song.
Take care, guys.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Later.